Hi, so I'm Halcyon. I wanted to just kind of sit and chat about all the books that I've been reading in September because I read some really good books and I like talking about the books that I read, so I thought that this would be a good way to just, yeah, I have quite a bit of time off at the moment, slowly going crazy. So in terms of what I've been reading in September, the kind of first thing that I ended up finishing in September was Angel of Storms by Trudy Canavan. This is book 2 out of the Millennium Rule series, and I also finished book 3, which is Successor's Promise as well in the month, so I thought I would just talk about them kind of together. It's like a fantasy series where we start off, we have kind of two main characters, Tyne and Riel. In the first book, Tyne is like he's studying at a magic academy, he's studying kind of sorcery but also archaeology. At the beginning of the first book he finds this kind of magical artifact, which is this woman that was turned into a book, and so she's able to hold kind of knowledge of anyone who's ever touched her. So she has knowledge going back like thousands of years, and then kind of things develop from there in terms of like the school wanting him to kind of give this book to them, and then he's not really too sure about it, and kind of things kind of devolve from there. Riel, on the other hand, she is kind of the daughter of some people who have newly kind of, her family work as dye makers, they've become quite rich, but they very much want her to find like a husband in the same kind of new, now like upper class circles that they're in, and kind of where she is, only the priests are able to use magic, and if you otherwise use magic then you're kind of seen as tainted. And so things kind of evolve for her when she gets kind of kidnapped by someone who's like tainted and using magic when they're not meant to, and then runs into like a young artist. And kind of things kind of also evolve from there. The series as a whole has like really grown from where we begin, but I feel like it does so in very like a way that's really easy to kind of follow, and everything just kind of grows and grows as our characters get exposed to kind of more and more of the world. I'm really enjoying it. I will say that when I began it, in the first book, I definitely felt like Tyne was my favourite character over Riel, just with what her storyline involved in that first book, but over the second and third book I like very much more enjoyed Riel's character over Tyne's, but they're very good, and I'm obviously finishing off the series currently, and I'm having a good time. So I believe, yeah, they both ended up being kind of 4-star reads for me. The next book that I read was A Venom So Dark and Sweet by Judy Lin, which is the sequel to A Magic Steeped in Poison. I read this obviously kind of when it first came out, and I've read this now that it's come into my library. It's kind of, the first book is very much kind of, it's based off of kind of Chinese culture, where, you know, in the process of kind of doing a traditional Chinese tea ceremony, you also kind of can tap into magic, and these practitioners are called Shin and Shi. And the first book is very much like a trial. You know, our main character is kind of trying to compete in this because she wants to find out more about the poison that is kind of affecting the land, which her sister has kind of caught. Obviously we're kind of now past the trial, so it becomes a lot more kind of quest-like. You know, they're off doing different tasks to get various different things, and then there's you know, like a final confrontation and everything resolves. I really enjoyed it. I really enjoyed kind of seeing all of our characters back again. I did really enjoy the world and the magic system and everything like that. But I think I rated the first one 4 stars, and this one only ended up being a 3-star read for me. That just like wasn't quite as compelling as I think the first one was for me. And unfortunately some of the new characters I just wasn't able to kind of get into as much. The next thing that I finished was The Hounds of the Baskervilles. I'm reading the Sherlock Holmes stories as part of the Letters from Watson project, which is like a Substack. Last year they were sending us all of the kind of short stories, and throughout the year. This year they're sending us all of the kind of Sherlock Holmes books. So honestly it's a bit of a different reading experience because you get like a chapter every 5 days, and then I'm like in the Discord server and people are chatting about kind of what happens in that chapter. It was a good time. I think obviously breaking up a little bit changes a bit of the reading experience, especially with something like Hounds of the Baskervilles, which is so like atmospheric. But like, I love Sherlock Holmes, I love Dr. John Watson. It was a good time. I ended up rating that 3 stars. So the next book that I read, and now we're going into like the really good reads that I had last month, was A Taste of Golden Iron by Alexandra Rowland. And I do have quite a funny story about this. So I was on Tumblr, as I do, just scrolling when I came across a post about an author kind of promoting their new book, which sounded quite interesting and everything. It's Yield Under Persuasion or something like that. I'll put a picture here. And, you know, I'm like, you know, reading it, thinking that it sounds quite interesting, and then I scroll back up and I notice that the URL of the poster is the same one as someone who I follow on Archive of Our Own on AO3, which then made me much more interested in reading something that this author had kind of traditionally published and wasn't fan fiction. So I check out what my library has available, and A Taste of Golden Iron was available from my library, so I picked it up. It was at that point that I also realised that this was a book that Goodreads had been recommending to me for years that I never kind of went into and picked up. I really, really enjoyed this. So this is like a, like fantasy kind of gay romance, which is one of my favourite genres of all time. And I think it's very much based, the world building is so cool, but based on kind of Ottoman Empire kind of things. We have, our 2 main characters are Cadeau and Evermere. Cadeau is the younger brother on the Sultan, and the Sultan has just had kind of her child, so he's very much that spare heir, and kind of through a series of misunderstandings he kind of causes a couple of deaths. He feels like he has clinical anxiety in this world that they do not understand that, so he is having a rough time. And he gets a new kind of head of his personal guard, which is Evermere, who is understandably quite annoyed about everything that's happened, and is just kind of a bit pissed off, and they get from that kind of quite tense start of their relationship to kind of getting to know each other a lot better and kind of forming an actual relationship kind of at the end of it. Part of that is they are investigating some kind of 2 mysteries that have kind of crimes that have happened. One of them is finding a bunch of kind of counterfeit coins, and the other one was a break-in to kind of the shipyard. I thought that this was really, really good. I think the world building was really good and really fascinating. I really loved like all of the kind of investigation and the mysteries. Like at one point Cadeau like starts talking about like economics and devaluation of currency, and it was genuinely like incredibly riveting and compelling. I found the relationship between Cadeau and Edemir like very compelling and very fun. There were generally parts where I was like screaming out loud, kicking my feet. It was a really good time. I felt like the author did a really good job at kind of writing a prince and kind of bodyguard kind of romance. Like obviously there is, you know, power dynamics and stuff to kind of consider in there, and I think it was just done really, really well. This was definitely kind of a 5-star read for me. I finished it and then immediately was like, I'm gonna read that again. So mark of, you know, something that really gripped me and compelled me. The next book that I read, I actually have a physical copy of because I borrowed a physical edition from my library, which is The Half-Life of Valery K by Natasha Pulley. So I read The Mars House by Natasha Pulley earlier this year. I really, really enjoyed it. It was a 5-star read from me. And so I kind of went, I want to read everything else that Natasha Pulley has ever published. And so this is the 3rd book of hers that I've read so far. So this is set in the 1960s. We have Dr. Valery Kolkanov, who was previously in the Gulag, who kind of gets brought out of that to kind of come to this weird radioactive town called City 40 to kind of do radiobiological experiments kind of there. And then he just kind of like investigates a bit what's going on, along with Shenkov, who is like the KGB kind of operative who's tasked with kind of keeping an eye on everything that's going on. This was incredibly good. Like, the atmosphere for this like town where something is wrong was really, really compelling. It was like everything that I wanted out of this book was kind of there. It was so good. I loved all of like the sciencey bits. I loved the atmosphere. I loved the relationships that are in this book as well. It was really good. It was, again, like an easy 5 stars for me. I absolutely kind of sped through this book. I just wanted to kind of continue reading it, kind of thing. I really like anything that Natasha Pulley's ever published, I'm not gonna lie. And yeah. The next book that I read was The Crimson Moth by Kristen Ciccarelli. I had a really fun time with this book. It was definitely something that's kind of a bit more out of my comfort zone, but yeah, it was a really fun read for me. This is basically set in a world where there was previously the kind of ruling class, and the upper classes were all witches, and then there was a revolution that kind of killed a bunch of them and took those down, and then there's like a new world order kind of put in. But obviously to kind of maintain that power, they are still kind of killing witches and trying to keep control in that kind of regard. One of our main characters is Rune, who is a witch, but because she turned over her grandmother in the kind of, what would you call them, like raids, she's able to maintain a place in kind of upper society. But she feels really guilty about it, so she's still working to kind of try and get witches free and escape to kind of the mainland along with some of her friends. And then the other main character is Gideon, who is a witch hunter who is kind of suspicious of Rune's kind of activity as this kind of like witch savior, because Rune basically plays off as this kind of airy socialite to kind of cover for her tracks. There was a lot of this that I really enjoyed. I really enjoyed the relationship between Gideon and Rune. I thought that was like really interesting and compelling. I felt like the magic system was like really interesting. Everything was like really fun. It was a really like quick, fast read for me. I felt like very entrenched in the world, kind of compelled by it. There were a couple of things that didn't really work for me. I felt like some of the plot twists I could see kind of coming. I really wasn't that interested in the kind of relationship, like the Gideon being like, oh no, like I felt like the Gideon being interested in Rune, but then like being like, oh well, we can't be together because I think that she might be a witch. That was really interesting. I'm really interested in Rune, but we can't be together because my younger brother is in love with her. Did not care for that at all, which was a shame because that is part of the story. The other thing that I had a big issue with, which is absolutely not important, was the fact that like chapter 2 of this book, Rune is kind of riding back from like a failed rescue attempt to get to the opera where she has to kind of show off and be there so that no one kind of suspects her of trying to rescue this witch. And so she's riding her horse kind of really quickly to get there, and then she gets off and we get described that she's wearing like a long dress and a cloak and like fancy shoes. I don't, like, is she riding astride on her horse? Because like, if she's doing that, should have had to like hike her skirts all the way up to like her waist, which doesn't really like play into that like ladylike socialite image that she's trying to present for herself, because other people will have seen her riding through the streets. That could have also, depending on the fabric of her dress, especially because this doesn't seem to be a world that has polyesters, like wrinkled her skirt fabric really badly, which again doesn't seem like something that she would do, both for that persona and also because she does genuinely care a lot about clothes and fashion. So then the other option is that she was riding side saddle, but there is absolutely no mention of that in the book. The next time she's riding a horse, she's wearing trousers. This isn't a big issue, but like, as a horse girly, like, riding side saddle isn't just like something easy, it's something that requires a different saddle to do it. You need to train your horse to respond to certain kind of, you know, like, inputs. That's not the word. You need to train your horse to respond to certain kind of commands and stuff like that. It's not exactly the same thing. I also don't think it's going to be completely easy to swap between one or the other, especially without mentioning the fact that you're swapping between one or the other. So that was not why I rated this book 4 stars, but it does feel like it by the amount I keep talking about it. And then the last book that I read this month was The Adventure Zone, the Suffering Game graphic novel. I had a really fun time with this. I, listened to the Adventure Zone Balance kind of as it was coming out. I really enjoy it. I really enjoy this story, so it's always a good time to have the chance to pick up the graphic novel and kind of read it again and kind of experience the story again. I do think that and basically, for those who don't know, the story for the Adventure Zone kind of Balance, which is what this kind of story gets told. So it's a actual play kind of D&D podcast, and the first kind of season on that show is what gets called kind of Balance. We've got 3 main characters, which is, if we see here, so Magnus, who is the human fighter, Taco, who is the elven wizard, and Mel, who is the dwarven cleric. They are kind of employed by this organisation called the Bureau of Balance to kind of recover these incredibly powerful magical artifacts so that they can get destroyed. And obviously there's other stuff going on, but that's kind of the very basic plot. And in this one, they are sent to recover something called the Animus Spell from a place called Wonderland, which is very kind of like game show-esque. I felt like the Wonderland section of this book, whilst it was very fun, didn't hit me as hard as when I was listening to it in the podcast. And I think part of that is because Griffin's music does such a good job of setting the scene for that. And I just felt like that part of the story kind of didn't really hit for me. However, everything that happens after that, when they get back to base, which is technically the downtime for that kind of arc, was so good, was really compelling. I loved how kind of everything there was kind of laid out, and I'm so excited to get to kind of story and song, and to finish off this story. This ended up being kind of a 4-star read for me. In terms of what I'm reading at the moment, I am reading The Lost Future of Pepper Harrow by Natasha Pulley, which is the sequel to The Watchmaker of Filigree Street, which is the other Natasha Pulley book that I've read so far. Having a really good time with that. And then obviously, like I mentioned, I am listening to Maker's Curse, which is the last book in the Millennium Rule series. Having a good time with that one as well. That's kind of what I'm reading at the moment. That's what I thought about the books that I read this month. That's kind of it. Hopefully I'll do more of these.